welcome back. This is lesson 13.6, Journal Applying Measures of Center and Variability. I will be able to analyze data sets based upon their measures of center and measures of variability. To compare them and draw conclusions. Vocabulary for this lesson, we have variability, which is how spread out the data is. Mean, it's mathematical average where we add them all up and divide by how many there are. Median, it's the middle number when they're in order from least to greatest. Mode, the one that shows up most often. Range is how far it spans, so the highest value minus the lowest value in a data set. Interquartile range is the distance between the upper quartile and the lower quartile, or it shows that middle half of the data. And the mean absolute deviation is the average distance from the mean. So here it says, each student in 6th grade worked hard to sell cards for a fundraiser. Compare the following information about the amount of cards sold by each student in each class to draw conclusions and compare them. So we are given the mean, median, and mode. Now let's remember that those show measures of center. So that's telling us about what the typical student did. So in Miss Hawthorne's class, the average sold was about 14 or 13 tickets, but we had no repetition. The average sold in Miss Blaine's class was 10. The median was 8. And we had some repeats of 0, 7, and 11 in that group. And Mr. Maven's class, average of 18, but it's showing that the median is 7 and the most repeated was 0. These other ones right here show the variability. Remember how far this data spans? So looking at Miss Hawthorne's class, from the highest to the lowest was 28. Interquartile range was 6, so that means that middle half of the data only spans 6. And the mean absolute deviation, or average distance from the mean, was 6.2. Looking at these, 13 was how far they spanned, so that means they weren't very far apart compared to this one. Their middle half was spread about the same amount though. And the mean absolute deviation is smaller and closer as well. So what that tells me here is that these ones are clustered closer together. It looks like we had some repeats of 0, 7, and 11, so they're probably clustered down more towards the lower amounts. Mr. Maven's had a range of 47. That tells us, and we know he had 0 in there, so that means the highest kid had to have sold 47 tickets. Interquartile range, so this is the middle half is crunched even closer together than these ones are. And 10.6 is the mean absolute deviation, so that takes into account the mean and all the numbers. So you see how those are bigger? That's an interesting thing to know. Alright, down here we got some things to fill in. So whose class varies the most and why? So we're looking at variability. How do I know which one varies the most? Well, it has to be this one. Look at the range here. The range is huge, but that middle half is actually closer crunched together than these two are. So that tells me this one is the most spread out because the range is huge, and also comparing these, its mean absolute deviation is also much larger than these other two. So that means that Mr. Maven's class varies the most because it has the largest range and largest mean absolute deviation. For sure we'll just write MAD. Because those are larger, that tells me this data is spread out farther than these. So if I were looking at these on box and whisker plots, this box plot would be much wider than these other ones. Alright, whose class probably sold the least amount of tickets? How can we know that by looking at this? Well, the average kid here sold 14 tickets. This one sold 10 and this one sold 18. This one, though, had a median of 13. This median was 8. So this median is lower. The average tickets is lower. So we got 2 measures of center showing us lower amounts. We also have this, we have modes of 0 and 7, which is below the 10, which tells me we probably had quite a few in the lower range. Another reason I can know that this is probably smallest beyond just these 2 is, look, these are the closest together, which tells me this data is in a shorter amount of space on the number line than this one is. So these ones are probably all crunched down there in the lower part of the number line between 0 and maybe like 15. So Miss Blaine's class probably sold the least amount of tickets because the mean and median are low. And it has the least variability. Meaning there wasn't a chance for someone to sell an outlier amount of tickets. Alright, someone's class had an outlier. Why and who? Alright, looking at this, remember outliers make our mean look much larger compared to the rest. 14 is not very far from 13. 10 is not very far from 8, but 18 is quite far from 7, especially when we know that the most repeated, was 0, and our range is 47. That range tells me I've got an outlier that's way high compared to the rest. So, Mr. Maven's class had an outlier because the mean is much larger than the median or mode. And it has a huge range. Meaning, in order to get up to the highest number, it had to span a lot of numbers. Now, somebody's class is the most consistent. Whose class is most consistent here? Well, noting that these are all pretty close together, and also that these are small, my measures of variability are low. That leads me to believe that Miss Blaine's class is most consistent. Miss Blaine's is the most consistent because it has the lowest measures of variability. Meaning it's not very spread out. So it is least spread out. Okay, at least half of whose class sold 13 or more tickets? How can we know that at least half? Okay, what's the halfway mark for us in statistics? Okay, it's the median. The median is the halfway point. So which one sold 13 or more tickets? At least half. This is the median. The halfway mark here was 8. The halfway mark here was 7, so it has to be Miss Hawthorne's class. So at least half of Miss Hawthorne's class sold 13 or more tickets because its median is 13. That means half must be 13 or higher. Now you see how we were able to make those judgments based just on those measurements. We don't know how many kids were in each class. There could have been 5 kids in each class. There could have been 200 kids in each class. We don't know that. But based on these values, we can make good judgments. Okay, rate yourself on this concept. 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Take a picture and turn it into Google Classroom.